Have you ever stopped and wondered how a military occupation can just go on? For years, even generations, in a world that says it values freedom. Well, today, we're going to dig into the systems that actually allow it to happen. And, maybe more importantly, we're going to explore how those very systems can be challenged.
So let's just start with the central puzzle, right? We all live in a world that, on paper at least, is all about justice, freedom, and human rights. So how is it possible that a foreign military occupation can continue, often for decades, with almost no real consequences?
You know, the easy answer is just to say, well, one side has more weapons. But it's so much deeper than that. The truth is, occupation isn't just held up by brute force. It's upheld by a system, a really powerful, interconnected system that's quietly built on silence, on strategic interests, and frankly, on a very carefully managed selective morality.
To really get our heads around this, we're going to break it down into three parts. First, we'll pull apart the system itself, the one that lets occupation thrive. Then, we're going to look at the very real human price of that system. And finally, and this is the crucial part, we'll explore the levers of change, the actual pressure points that can begin to dismantle the whole thing.
All right, let's dive into part one, the system of silence. This is where we're going to dissect the 5 key pillars that hold this entire structure in place. You'll see they often operate just out of sight, just beneath the surface. So these 5 pillars, they don't just stand on their own, they all lean on each other. It all starts with political protection, right? Where powerful nations use their alliances and, their veto power in global forums to shield occupying forces from any real accountability. Then you've got the economic interests. We're talking lucrative arms sales, trade partnerships, things that make the status quo profitable for some. This gets propped up by media narratives, which so often frame the story in a very selective way, shaping how we all see it and kind of dialing down any sense of urgency. All of this is made so much worse by weak international enforcement. I mean, you can pass all the resolutions you want, but if nobody acts on them, they're just words. And the result of all that, you get public apathy. When the whole system seems too big and the story is too confusing, that pressure from the public on their leaders, it just evaporates.
And that brings us to what is, without a doubt, the most important part of this story. Because these abstract systems, politics, economics, media, they don't exist in a vacuum. They create very real, very concrete human suffering. This is where we have to move beyond the headlines.
Wow. This quote, it just gets right to the heart of the human cost, doesn't it? It's about that exact moment when an entire part of your identity, your name, where you're from, your culture, suddenly becomes a reason for someone else to be suspicious of you. Just the simple act of being who you are is seen as a potential threat. And that is where the very fabric of our shared humanity just begins to tear apart.
And this slide right here perfectly illustrates that disconnect we were talking about with the media. The headlines, they give us fragments. They give us hashtags and noise and half-truths. But the reality, on the ground, the life that's actually being lived, it's one of quiet resilience. It's patience in the middle of hardship. It's kindness when there are no cameras around. It's a fundamental humanity and hope that somehow survives against all odds. That's the full human story that almost never gets told.
This breakdown of humanity is so often backed up by a breakdown of the law. This idea, inspired by the source bulldozer justice, it explains what happens when the legal systems just fail. When due process gets thrown out the window, when the law basically goes to sleep, raw power wakes up and starts calling itself justice. For a family, that's not some abstract idea. It is the very real sound of their home being demolished with zero legal recourse. And that right there is injustice at its absolute peak.
And this ties directly back to that pillar of economic interests. So often, we hear occupation justified with words like development or progress. But you have to ask, if that development is built on the destruction of people's homes, their communities, their ancestral lands, is it really progress? Or, as the source here suggests, is it actually a kind of slow self-destruction, where the price is always paid by the people who can least afford it?
Okay, so we've looked at the system, and we've looked at its devastating cost. And it's heavy stuff. But here's the thing, it is not unbreakable. Let's move to part 3 and talk about how this all builds toward real solutions. This is about the levers of change, the specific ways that pressure can be applied to start taking this whole structure apart.
So how do you dismantle a system like this? Well, the pressure has to come from the outside. It starts with informed citizens, people like you and me choosing to look past the easy headlines and actually question biased narratives. It grows with economic accountability, when boycotts and divestments start to challenge the idea that occupation can be profitable. It demands stronger international mechanisms that have the real teeth to enforce the law, not just endlessly debate it. And all of this has to be amplified by independent media that is committed to telling the full, unfiltered story. But ultimately, it all comes down to collective civic pressure. Because history shows us one thing, time and time again: when enough people unite and demand change, governments have no other choice but to listen.
And that really gets us to the core truth of this entire issue. The system of occupation, it doesn't keep going because the world can't see it. It's not invisible at all. It continues because through this toxic mix of apathy, strategic interest, and silence, it is tolerated.
So this explainer doesn't end with a neat and tidy answer. It ends with a challenge for all of us, really. Now that we know about the system, its human cost, and the levers for change, the real question is about our role in all of this. Are we going to remain silent participants in a system that tolerates injustice, or are we going to become active voices demanding something better? Because at the end of the day, systems don't just change on their own. People change them. Awareness is that critical first step, and that's a form of